Oh God, look, I hope I look relaxed now, Look, when you get to my age, you could be taken at any time, and there could be omens. A moment ago there was a sort of a flashing light, and I thought, oh my God, could that be an omen? But no, it wasn't an omen at all. It was just that I think the batteries in this lighting equipment here were sort of running out. So I'm still with you, so there we are. And still with me, for that matter. So there we are. Anyway, what I want to do is move on to just the nuts and bolts. How did you wash up? How did you wash your clothes? How did you open a tin can? Just the sorts of things that in 100 years' time, when in fact they do recreate a Charleville street from the 1940s, you'll be able to see all of these things then. But I want it now to be a recording by someone who lived in that period. This is the reality TV, I suppose, but I think that's important because it mightn't seem very important now, but it will seem, and people will be grateful in maybe 100 years' time. But let's hope, I'll move it over here. Let's hope that Schweppes infused natural mineral water with grapefruit discover this, before then, and so it comes, I get this truckload of stuff. So anyway, that's my plan, and that's why I'm doing this. So I find a lot of what I tell you to be, I find it quite interesting. I find it quite amusing when I look back and think, that's what happened, that's what people said. And, but it might seem, like sort of fripperies to you, things of no great consequence. And in a sense, they're not. But put them all together and they give a picture. Now, it might not be a very complimentary picture, always. And you might think, oh, what a lot of empty-headed people they were. Well, maybe they were. Maybe they were empty-headed. The women were concerned about whether or not they could pinch peach. Or they were concerned with whether they were getting too fat or not. Or, might I add, they used to discuss the possibilities of abortion occasionally. Not that I was supposed to hear that, but I used to hear it, I can tell you. And if you follow those cemetery records, as I have done, you'll find there are a number of quite mysterious deaths of otherwise healthy women of childbearing age among the records. That caused me to wonder, a bit like those fires. No one was ever found responsible for a fire. Between the cat or the mouse, you see. But I sort of listened, and you may think, oh, this is all retired stuff, and indeed it may well be. But that's how people lived. That's what people said. And that's what was going on down that end of town. Now, whether life was any different for the movers and shakers, I really do not know. But of course, the movers and shakers in any society are generally very good at covering up. Years and years and years ago, I was working in a school that they're mainly, very much working class kids. And one day we came in contact with a number of students from one of the more prestigious private schools. And what I discovered, there was a very great difference between the two of them. The kid from the working class, the kid from the ordinary state school, had no secrets. They just let it all hang out. What you saw is what you got. But the kid from the private school, you only met a facade. The kid from the private school had learned to present himself as a facade. What lay behind that, you really have no idea. But I can tell you, with the kid from the working class state high school, what you saw was what you got. So there was no sense of deception there. But anyway, enough of all of that. On we go. Now listen, there were two words yesterday that as you get older, words don't come to you as quickly as once they did. And I was talking yesterday about bad breath. And I was talking about, bad breath and so on, but I couldn't think of the name of what we call it. Be of good cheer. It came to me very so shortly afterwards, halitosis. If you've got halitosis, I can't give you any advice, but I can tell you it's bad. Do something about it. Okay. The other thing was the Index Expurgatorius. Now, the Index Expurgatorius, and because of my disease, I tend to slur words a little bit. Forgive me. Anyway, the Index Expurgatorius was one where it was sort of the forbidden index. And I feared that, some of my work may have ended up on the Index Expurgatorius, as well it might. You never know. So anyway, we have to put up with that. Now, the other thing too, now this is historical. I said I thought that A.S. Dawkins was in, that would be Edward Street, opposite the picture show. And I was right. That's where the Dawkins timber yard was. There was a second timber yard up there on, we'll call it Gary Hill, down the hill from what's now that what do they call it, that water tower. I arrived in Charleville a year or two ago and someone said, "Oh, what do you think of our water tower?" And I looked. It looked like a faded 1940s black and white photo taken with our box brownie that had been processed by Mr. Fraser. And when I looked more closely, I discovered that there were sort of shapes. You did your money there, I can tell you. If you're going to do something like that, do bold colours or something. Have a kangaroo or a fire, whatever, anything at all. But these ghostly figures. I thought it's bloody awful. But anyway, enough of all of that. Unsworths were down on that hill, so there were two timber yards at that time. One Unsworth, one A.S. Dawkins. And A.S. Dawkins was the one near Riley Forbes, near the picture show in Edward Street, and the other one was there in Paris Street. And as I checked on that last night, I had to do some checking just to be sure. Where was A.S. Dawkins? Where was Unsworth's? Because I couldn't remember Unsworth's, as a matter of fact. But as I read there, well, of course, you go to Trove and you put in Unsworth or A.S. Dawkins or something like that, timber yard. Well, you get, Trove gives you all sorts of things, interesting court cases and, all that wonderful stuff. And but nevertheless, those court cases about Mr. Steele, who put on a veranda and began work on it before he had actually received the official letter of approval from the council, because council bylaws had come into force and they had forbidden anyone to start work before they had been officially notified that the work was approved. It may have been approved, but until they had that official, well, naturally the magistrate fined Mr. Steele heavily because he would be disobedient almost, you see. But anyway, that particular case, which brought in religion and God only knows what not, I tell you. In the 1940s were many times strange ways. How religion and which church you went to got into the court case over Mr. Steele's veranda, I do not know. But anyway, there it was. Okay. But as I read that case, I discovered that I'd been, I don't know whether I'd been making a mistake. Well, I suppose I had, I don't know. But I referred to Tate's news agency. But in fact, it was called Usher's news agency. But the fact that I'm confused now does not surprise me at all, because in my youth, I was never really clear. The Ushers and the Tates and the Steeles, somehow or another, I sort of bundled them all together, and maybe they were all tied up somehow or another with Edward Street, the picture show, and all that type of thing. And were the Steeles, I think, who knew a bit about radio, were they communicating with the Japanese? No one said they were communicating with the Japanese. They only said they know a little bit about radio and maybe they are communicating with the Japanese. Oh, dear. But, as I say, don't believe everything that I tell you. Just look, there could be a grain of truth. And the grain of truth in that story is that the Steeles knew a little bit about radio. But before they knew it, they were sort of fifth columnists. Oh, dear. There we are. So anyway, it was called Usher's News Agency. Now, what the relationship between the Ushers and the Tates might have been, I don't know. But I know that Jack Martin, I think, married a Tate. and so on and on it went. Look, it was all too much for me. And clever child though I may have been, I had no interest in unravelling that one because I bundled them all together in my mind. So there we are. Okay then. Now let me see. I've got, now look, I'll just go down the list as I've got it here. There's no relationship between one and the other. Iansons. Now that shop on the corner there, now remember on the corner there was the schoolyard, then over the road was Iansons, over the road from there was Bell's Hotel, that became Hickson's Hotel I think, I don't know what it is now. Then over the road from there of course was Tats, which I think is sort of flats or something now I think, I don't know. But anyway, Iansons. Now, we didn't do much shopping at Iansons. I don't know why. You'd think we would, you know, because, you know, it was that Newtown. Newtown was the, you know, the Teamsters part of town, because they had Bolivar Richardson down there a little bit from the blacksmith, down there from Tats. Then you had Bell's over there, and then you had Britcher's Butcher Shop down the road a little bit. But then you had Iansons. Now, why? And just up the road was George Proud. Oh, you know, Red Rag of George Proud. My friend of my father. Very bright family, that one, I can tell you. But anyway, we didn't actually do much shopping there because we shopped at Espy's. But the Espy's and the Prouds, now if there was any relationship between the Prouds and Iansons, I do not know. But Iansons Corner will live in the minds of most of those who lived at who were at the school in that period. This would be in round about, let me think, well, I'll say around about 10 or 11, 30. This is around about 48 or 49. There was a fairly pugnacious young lady. I think they lived over the line, but this fairly pugnacious young lady was robust, and she could have knocked the socks off any boy in the school, which she attempted to do with some regularity. So that if you were foolish enough to go home that way and use that particular footpath, you were in some danger, because she may well set upon you, because it could well have been rumoured that you had said something unkind about her or something. I don't really know. Now, whether people were set upon out of sheer serendipity, or whether they were set upon because of their evil tongues, or what this young lady thought were evil tongues, but oh, she was an Amazon, I can tell you. And if you had any sense at all, either you didn't go home that way, you went home down along the gully, or you took the route up and then came down King Street. But gee, to go down Parry Street when that particular young... No, look, I dare not even... Look, even after all these years, that's 50, that's 70, 75 years, and I still live in terror, as probably half the town did. Because, gee, of course those people who lived at the other end of town, they'd have been free of this. But those of us who lived down our end of town, oh, we were in constant danger. But oh, there were frequent fights there. I've seen boys, well, run. They all ran, of course, because boy, could this girl pack a punch. Oh, she was an Amazon. Oh, look! I don't know what to do. Supposing the girl sees us, supposing she recognises herself. Oh dear. Well, at least I've got the consolation knowing that she'd be about 85 by this time anyway. And that might save me, I would have thought. But nevertheless, I used to go, if I had to go that way, or if I thought that a particular person had been named as the victim of the day, I would go on the opposite side of the footpath on the opposite side of the street, and I would sort of look across. And in looking across, because I was a coward, you know, I wouldn't get involved. And that, God, I'd have run like mad. No Bilby and me, I can tell you. When that girl was, oh, she was a vicious piece. Well, she was possibly sweet of nature, but, you know, riled. Well, a bit like my sister. You know how my sister said, boom, come home or get home. Well, maybe she had a bit more of that. Yeah, a bit more than that. Okay, then. But I've seen boys run inside I. Anson's shop and take refuge in the showcase, the windows. I don't know why the I. Ansons didn't call the police. But it was so regular, I suppose the police wouldn't have bothered coming. But anyway, that was I. Anson's Corner, well-known fighting place. But always, it was the one, well, I'm trying to think if there's a modern equivalent. Supposing Venus Williams, what's her sister's name? Venus and whatever, I don't know. I mean, she's a robust girl. And supposing she was going to attack you and just, out of the crowd, you'd run and I'd run too. Anyway, that's often used to happen there at I. Anson's Corner. Oh, it was terrible. Okay then, now, shortly after the war, Australia started getting migrants. Unusual migrants. We were long since accustomed to the migrants from, English migrants or migrants. Well, we ourselves were migrants. From England, Scotland, Ireland, and so on. And it never occurred to me when we were at school, that Calcino might have been a foreign-sounding name. And if you were a Heinemann, that never occurred to me that it's a nice old German name and so on. I would have said, oh, these are all wonderful English names. It never occurred to me that anyone was anything other than English or British, you see. So if you were a Heinemann or a Calcino or whatever it may be, or a Stein, I just said, oh, yes, they must be English, as I would have thought. And but anyway, after the war, about the first lot that turned up here were called the Bolts. The Bolts. I don't even know that the name New Australian had arrived by that point. But anyway, we had read about the Bolts coming. These are people from the Baltic states, you see. Anyway, one day, of course, and the town being the town. Now, if this was, what did I say? This was about, let's supposing I was about 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. 47, say 47, 48. You knew everyone in town, and if you mightn't have known the name, but, you knew they were local. And if they weren't local, well, you'd know. Okay. But anyway, Australia was getting these news, and the news went around, the school, of course, early in the day, the news went around that there was a Bolt in town. Well, this is like hearing that a Martian had come. Well, I was going home from school one afternoon. And you know how if you come down that street from the railway crossing, you come down past I. Anson's and Tats, and you go down over the gully, there's a bit of a dip. And then on the other side there's we'll say the Edward Street dip or the Watson Street dip, whatever it may be. Anyway, I was coming down the dip and walking towards Tats and I. Anson's. And as I was walking down that slope, down the opposite slope came the Bolt. Well, I think I should say the Bolt, but we said the Bolt anyway. I looked, and he was this florid, I think is florid meaning reddish? The French say rougeâtre. He had this rougeâtre complexion, and he was quite ugly. Ooh. Okay then. I knew this was the Bolt. Well, this was like a creature from the Black Lagoon. This was like a creature from Mars or Uranus or whatever it may be. I turned and ran. Oh, I was never so terrified in all of my life. He was walking down the street because he'd got a job as a butcher up there in at that stage it might have been called Britches Butcher, or it might have been called Hastings Butcher, I'm not sure. But anyway, he was that's where he was working, as a butcher. But he looked like a butcher, and he looked as if he'd butcher you. Oh, I was terrified. Well, obviously we did learn to live with bolts and God only knows what not. And but that was the first time I ever saw someone that I knew to be a newcomer to the country, and it filled me with fear. I mean, he was not... Well, I told you about my Uncle Jim. He was tall and handsome and, a very fine creature. He could have been a hero in a Jane Austen novel, I would have thought. Apart from those oleander goings on and so on down near Dr. Shaughnessy's, but we'll leave that aside. Uncle Jim had there was a nobility in his bearing, a nobility, chiselled features and all that sort of thing. But this Bolt, no. Oh, he filled me with fear. But that reminds me about a detail in the butcher shop. Now, when you would go to Britch's Butcher Shop or Hastie's Butcher Shop, they had a sign on the wall which, I loved it. I mean, they used to have these filthy, bloody, sticky fly papers hanging down. They dangled from the ceiling, 12 down, and they weren't often changed. And they would have had a million flies. And they were yellow, and flies stuck to them all over. Okay, they festooned the ceiling, if you like. But if you looked across to the far side of the shop, there was a sign there which I loved. It said, "No dogs, no expectoration." No, it didn't say that at all. It said, "Dogs and expectoration prohibited." Well, I love the prohibited bit, but I love the expectoration even more. Now, I have no need to explain that. So I did not spit, nor did I bring the dog into the shop. But it was a wonderful, wonderful sign. You don't see them these days, but that's how it was in the 40s. Anyway, in that shop, the floor was all covered in sawdust, and they had a dirty big block there, wood. I don't know what sort of tree it was, but it was some primeval forest, probably 1,000 years old, but it was a chopping block, and that was in the middle of the butcher shop. But we used to make a bit of money out of it, because, when you go to the butchers these days, what do? You buy meat, and they slap it on a piece of paper, and then they wrap it up in white paper or something. I don't know. If I could, I would go and get a hogget myself these days, but I don't sort of buy. So I don't really know what happens in butcher shops these days, but nevertheless. But in those days, this business of slapping the meat on a piece of white paper and then wrapping it up in virginal white wrapping paper was unknown. And we used to gather together newspapers. And you'd go up to the Heinemann, not Heinemann's, you'd go up to Britch's Butcher Shop. You say, "Do you want to buy some newspaper?" And yes, they would buy newspaper for, a penny a pound or whatever it may have been. And that's what you got your meat wrapped in. I think they might have slapped on a bit of white paper to start with. But beyond that, it was, how people say that what's news today is the chip wrapping of tomorrow. Well, in Charleville, tomorrow brought the newspaper around your meat and so on. So that's what, I don't know whether Dignan's was like. I don't know, Dignan's, seemed a little bit more elegant, I think. But there wasn't a lot of elegance about Britch's Butcher Shop. But if you wanted meat, you got. And so no expectoration. It was prohibited. Dogs were prohibited also. And don't be troubled by the flies on the fly paper. So there we go. Okay, then now let's move on from there. I did mention in one of them. See, I had technical difficulties one day, This is when I tried to get rid of the 7 seconds and the 10 seconds. But instead of getting rid of the 10 seconds and the 5 seconds, I got rid of all the rest except that. And part of that involved Jim Chickless. But I think I mentioned Jim Chickless because he was reputed to use the sink for disapproved of purposes. But we won't worry about Jim. Okay. Now, there was another one down here. Oh, yes. And there's more than a grain of truth in this one. You'll recall that early in the 19th century, they began forming unions, and it ended up being the AWU. But before it was the AWU, there were a number of other names vaguely similar to that. And we had the shearers' strike in Charleville, and then they had a camp down there near the 2 Mile, as you might recall, and. I have no doubt the Bilbys went down there from time to time. Well, which Bilbys would have been there at that time? No. My grandfather, no, he wouldn't have been there because he wasn't a shearer. That was a very elevated profession, I think. But anyway, the thing is that, there were various sort of attempts at forming, and finally it sort of all these organisations coalesced into the AWU. And so, they were fighting the Graziers, and which will lead me into the Warrego Club in a moment. They were fighting the Graziers, squatters, cockies, whatever it may have been. Of course, at the same time, they were fighting the Chinese who were taking European jobs. And so they had to be sacked as the cooks that they were. So anyway, there was a fellow called Brennan. Ted, must have been Ted, I think, Ted Brennan. But he was the secretary of the AWU. And anyway, I can't remember the years exactly. It may have been 1897 and 1898, or 1899 and 1898 and 1889, in consecutive years anyway. Where the AWU office is now, I assume that was the site of the original AWU office. It was one of those little sort of shacks that may have formed a sort of a non-conformist church in the Downs area somewhere. Those villages on the Downs that have got these non-conformist churches about 6 kilometres out of town. Well, it was a tiny little cubbyhole of a place. Anyway, that's where the AWU office was. And anyway, one year on a certain date, I think it was the date of the annual general meeting of the AWU, and election, and financial reconciliation day, and sports day, or something like that. Well, on the first year, it's the occasion of the annual financial reconciliation and election and all that sort of thing. And apparently there was a pause in proceedings while they all then proceeded to the sports ground. I don't know, they probably had, sugar bag races and things like this. Well, lo and behold, while they're out there having the sports, the building went up. As buildings in Charleville did go up. Well, this was regarded as yet another act of God, and so people got on with their lives. And the following year, on the same day, on the election day, with the ballots to be counted and with the financial reconciliation to be done, and with the sugar bag races and three-legged races and so on to go on, out they went. They left all the books and everything like that in the hall while they were enjoying themselves. Fête, champêtre. The AW hall went up again. Same thing in 2 consecutive years. Well, okay then. Apparently it wasn't as the circumstances were not really mysterious, since Ted found himself in court, but he got out of it because he got out of it on a technicality. Apparently he could not have robbed one of these sort of statutory or whatever it might have been organisations, because the judge found, by the brilliant advocacy of one of the local solicitors, I don't know which one, that as it wasn't a properly formally recognised by the government entity, and therefore no theft could have taken place from it, or not theft on the basis of the charge. And so Ted walked free. But there we are. If you read about corruption in the society, it began in Charleville quite early in the piece. Okay then. Well now, of course we talk about those Tories, the squatters. And I said that I didn't like walking down the street, near Coroni's, because that was for the gentry. And I didn't like walking down near the Charleville, because that had that hallway going down to that house of ill repute. What do they call it? What do you call it? Poodles or something. What do they call that thing? Billiards, yes, not poodles. Okay then. Well, so I kept away from there because my mother said, oh, the lowest of the lot of there. Well, in the middle was a place called the Warrego Club. Well, I didn't like walking near the Warrior Go Club either because, that was for the ultra gentlemen of town. And, you had to be mustachioed, as many of them were, because if you were mustachioed, that really showed how elite you were. And about the 40s, I think there used to be a certain sort of blue shirt that you couldn't get in Fitzwalters or Pall Mall. You could only get it through the, Wincham Carson or something like that. Lovely shirts, good quality. But it was the, they'd wear the jodhpurs or something like this. I can't remember what you'd call the material that their pants were made out of. But they had a sort of a uniform that marked them off from the common folk. But there was this Warrego Club, only for gentlemen. And the likes of Lower King Street, thinking they could ever enter there, even walked past. It was almost sacrilege. But I used to creep by occasionally. Just as I crept into the church, and I crept into the Dalton, and I crept near the, what do you call that place? The Poodles Club. Because they had a bird cage. They had a great big bird cage in front, filled with all sorts of colourful parrots. Well, I wasn't interested in what the goings-on may have been inside the club. That was their affair. I don't know what they got up to in there. It would have been the sort of thing that gentlemen with moustaches, oh God, horrible, horrible. It wasn't like Hitler or anything like that, but they were grey sort of moustaches that came here. Not these Italian type ones. These were very sort of elegant. Well, they were supposed to be elegant or something, I don't really know. But I was interested in that because they had this wonderful collection of coloured parrots. Not your old galah or anything like that. These were mountain parrots such as you might find in the mountains. But I only crept down past there occasionally, quickly, furtively almost, because it was beyond my station in life. So, but it's got. I think it's fallen on hard times. So I believe, because I think they take women there now. And it may be women of the croquet club group. I don't know. But once you start, once these clubs start taking women, they've fallen on hard times. They want the cash. So there we are. Okay then. Now we've got that one. Now, wait a minute. Why don't I go back? Why don't I just go down here? I've got Unsworth Experitor, Halitosis, Waldner. Yes, okay then. Now, I'm almost at the end of my list here. Oh, no, not quite. I have to go vertically. I seem, I think, to some people who know me. You see, some people who know me only in a later guise in life. They know me from the university, or they know me from travels, or they know me from writing, or whatever it may have been. And they think, he should have a moustache. Because I think they think that I'm from the quality. Well, I don't exactly bung it on or anything like that, but if they think I'm from the quality, well, I'm content to let them think I'm from the... Well, I used to be quite content to let them think I'm from the quality, but from these days, I don't care. I'm not from the quality. But, I know how to bung it on. If I go to the Opera House in Vienna, or if I go to the Opera House in Zurich, or the Opera House in London, well, I can fit in quite well. If I'm with academic groups, I can fit in quite well. If I'm in China and I'm dealing with whatever Chinese things, I can fit in quite well. And people would think, oh dear, what a sophisticated being he is. He may be royal. They could think like, I don't really know. Well, that's not what everyone says. Some of them call me an old bastard. Oh, I've heard some terrible things, But anyway, no matter. I'm beyond all of that. I don't care. But the thing is that I'm not. I'm from Lower King Street. And if you don't like it, well, stiff cheese for you. But if someone from Lower King Street can do the things that have been made available to me, then good on them and good for them. Their life is probably, I mean, if I had followed in my father's footsteps and the Lower King Street footsteps, I probably would have been a shearer or maybe a wool presser or something like that. You never know if I'd built up my strength. But no, I've been very lucky. And lucky, not because of anything particularly that King Street gave me, but simply because of what the school gave me. And, my message to all and sundry, if you want to move in life, get yourself well educated. All this business about, equal outcomes and all that sort of thing, that's all bullshit, I can tell you. That's sort of dumbing down, and you certainly don't want that. If you're a school kid, you get in and work and you let education raise you. And that's how lucky I was. But I often think about this. In our house, we had no books at all. I know I lie. There was one book. It was a dirty old stain-covered paperback book, a penguin book, called The Saint. We never read it, of course, because it was the sort of thing that was physically unattractive. How we got the damn thing, I really do not know. I did read a little bit about it recently. It didn't make me want to read it again. Of course, it would be destroyed by this. But yes, there was a book there. But it was never opened because it was a dirty old thing. And how it got there, I don't know. But there were no books in our home. There were no books in the school. Now, that may well cause your teeth to fall out, but there were no books in the school. You had your reading book, and that was the book. Primary school had no books. The high school had no books. None. Okay then. And then when I was in high school, yes, there was a library there, which I didn't use much. I was sort of only about that time introduced to books, shall we say, about that time. Anyway, the thing is, the Charleville had no books. If you went up to Usher's or Tate's news agency, yes, there were some books there along the side, but they were not books that anyone ever seemed to buy. And I don't know how they were chosen, but they were. But eventually, it might have been the council or the state government, they decided there would be a town library. Well, the town library, I'm told, I asked about this the other day, and I'm told that it's now inhabited by a dentist. And it's a little building, like a country WC, red brick, I think, between what used to be the picture show and the town hall. And that was the first library. Now, I don't know whether it was probably a state government thing. But okay, so books arrive in the town in this library, and I went in one day, and what did I find? I found a number of books, but someone had decided that they'd wear best if they were all covered in shelving bays of blue, green or red. That's all. Every book. The dust jackets all gone, and they're all covered in this bays of blue, green and red. They were not enticements to reading, I can assure you of that. Oh dear. But anyway, that was I think that was in about the mid-50s, I would have thought, that turned up, sometime about then. But, if anyone wanted to get on, it was not easy. If you and your family and the town and the school had no books, what were you going to do? You had no internet, and 4VL was not exactly any sort of fountain of learning, I can assure you of that. As I tell somewhere, 4VL on Saturday was just an absolute dead loss. The mornings were taken up with reading the racing acceptances, and then in the afternoon probably a continuation of the racing acceptances and the results of the races. Oh gee, the local SB bookies must have paid 4VL a lot of money for that. All day Saturday, racing acceptances. Oh, a terrible business. But as, sort of town improvement, it was not really the vehicle that you would hope for. There was only one hope that you had, and that is that you got what books were you had, in your textbooks at school. Get in and learn the stuff, and get in and do well in your exam. That simply means hard work. And a good teacher, you would hope. But anyway, oh dear. So if people were going to rise above whatever Charleville may have given them, they needed to get in and get something done, because there were no books in the houses, and that library, when it finally turned up with these unattractive looking books in shelving bays of blue, red and green, oh dear, it was absolutely nauseating. But nevertheless people have succeeded. I look in my class, I don't know what happened to them all. Now the very best one in our class was Don Russell. If there were 100 exams, he would have beaten me 99 times out of 100, I think. But I wished him well. It just seemed to be the natural order of things. But there were some other good people, really good people in our class. Kathleen Harriman was good. Margaret Roberts was good. Carl McKinnon was good. Errol Stein was good. Michael Gulshannon was good. I'm trying to think of who the others were who were pretty good. But they're the ones whose names, there were some drongos in the middle and others a little more drongish perhaps at the bottom, but they were nice kids nevertheless. A few drongos in the middle. Once, I don't know what happened. Maybe I was feeling a bit off. But I did a maths exam once. And normally I'd get in the 90s. But on this occasion, Bill Adams may have been a bit off himself, I'm not sure. But I got 67%. I was shamed. And I had to take the exam paper home and show my mother that I had got only 67%. And I was apologising. I say, look, this is so terrible, because that's the mark, and I won't name them, but there were a couple of other people in the class who always got about 67%, and I thought they were absolute drongos. And I say, that's the mark that those so-and-so boys usually get. Anyway, my mother, unbeknown to me, and expressing her feeling apparently, wrote, she was supposed to sign it, you see. Instead of signing it, she wrote at the top, bloody awful. Well, you had to take the exam paper back to show that your parents had seen it. So I just brought it in, handed it in, I didn't look at it. And Bill Adams said to me, Ray Bilby, come here. Well, usually it's, Ray Bilby, stop talking. Ray Bilby, come here. So Ray Bilby came here, and Bill Adams looked morally outraged. Oh, I thought, what's going on here? He said, what's this going on here? And he showed me the exam paper. Not with M. Bilby on top of it, but rather bloody awful. Well, I had to sort of say words to the effect that Mr. Adams, there is no quality in our house, and so expletives like this are perfectly normal. But I didn't say that. I just said, oh, my mother must have made a mistake. She confessed that she meant to rub it out, but she forgot. Oh dear, fancy Bill for pretending moral outrage. He was a Charleville fellow himself. He'd have been as crude and rough as we were. I don't know where he came from. He wasn't from Lower King Street, but Bill pretending moral outrage over bloody awful. Oh, the fraud. I rang him many years later, I thought, I wonder, is that old bastard still alive? My mother was still alive at the time. I was talking to her and I said, I wonder, is that old bastard Bill Adams still alive? I looked in the phone book and lo and behold, A.H. Adams. I rang him and said, is that Bill Adams from Charleville? Well, yes, indeed, he said. He was 91, he confessed at the time. And, I said, oh, the old hypocrite, He said, who is speaking to me, Well, I said, this is Ray Bilby here from Charleville. He clearly did not remember me. And so, he sort of filibustered for a time. before declaring that, yes, you are one of the best students I ever taught. And I thought, Bill, you are lying. You don't even know who you're talking to. Oh dear. But Bill then told me he'd become principal of Bundamba State School, I think, by this time. And he'd retired from there. But he then told me his philosophy of principalship, which was all about love. And if you promote love in your school, you'll have a wonderful school. Oh, well, okay, then I profess to go along with that particular philosophy. But I thought it was all bullshit, because Bill didn't exactly exude love when he was teaching us. He had a pretty good waddy. And, Ray Bilby, come here, what is this? Well, that's a bit like Old Bawley Kirk. It wasn't quite like that, but nevertheless, this affectation of moral outrage, because my brother had said bloody awful, as indeed it was, 67%. 67 things right and 33 things wrong. Would you trust anyone to design a plane with a mark like that? I wouldn't. Oh dear, there we are. Okay, no behold. Oh, yes, I meant to correct this thing. The Duke of Gloucester, I looked him up. He was the Governor-General briefly, the old bastard. He came in 45. I haven't got it noted down here. He came in 45, stayed during 46 and left early in 40. I think he came in about December of 45. Was here in 46 and was gone by March 47. He clearly sought recall very early in the piece. The colonies were really not for him, and he sought refuge, I think, in grog. Oh, yes. But anyway, he wasn't King George the Sixth brother. He was the son of King George the Fifth. So there we are. That's how it goes. Okay. Oh, I've got a note here. Little things. I don't know whether I mentioned. How did people... Oh, maybe I could leave this. I was going to talk about how did we entertain ourselves. You know, if you lived down our end of town, there were no other kids around us. There was only me and my brother and my cousin. Oh, and my sister. There were some kids over there in Carter Street, but apart from Lenny Lewis, wonderful fellow, any other kids that were there, we really didn't have much to do with. So, you know, there were really just the four of us, fighting most of the time, I might add. I mean, if you talk about recreation, I think that fighting was one of our recreations. Well, Janice and Stuart and I, we didn't fight, but we fought with Don. We were constantly at war with Don, and Don was constantly at war with us. He surrounded our house once, you know. But we dealt with him as best we could. He surrounded the house. And I don't know if you've ever seen any of these spy versus spy comics. Well, we found what missiles we could, and he never knew what window we were going to emerge. We'd open the window, bang, and we'd throw whatever we could find at him. Oh, a lot of things were bent on that occasion. But that was not unusual. And then there were other things that happened that are too vile for me to... I'd tell you in confidence, but I wouldn't like to tell you some of the things we did to trick him, you know. They were excrementitious. And I won't go into that, although we did employ the officers of the local postman to do an excrementitious trick upon him. But anyway, we fought from time to time. But what else did we do? We didn't have much to do. There was a little pool that used to be down there at the crossing going up to the cemetery. We go crayfishing there. We could always catch crayfishing there. My mother had a very battered old, what do you call it, colander? Yeah, colander. Oh, very battered. We'd get a bit of cotton and a bit of meat and we'd get the crayfish. Sometimes we'd get... And if you went right down, if there was another pool... You'd follow the gully down to about the end of the golf course, and there was a pool there, unknown virtually to man, quite unknown, except to us. And we went down there when we first discovered it had these great big crayfish, you know, with bluish sort of shells and so on. And we had a bonanza there that day. So there was crayfishing, that's true. There was theoretical bird shooting with, what do they call those things? some sort of guns, little metal slugs in them. I can't remember what you call them, but we had one. There was one, or no doubt Don had one, because Don, the only child, Don had everything. We were very jealous. Or we had Shanghais, or we had bows and arrows, all of which were non-lethal, I can assure you, because we missed the lot. We try to shoot happy families. But have you ever tried to shoot a happy family? No way. But that used to be one of our recreations. The other one, of course, was a cemetery. And the other one was looking enviously at the merry-go-round of these sewage treatment works. But other than that, there wasn't anything very much. We did get down to we got down a very adventurous one day. We got down as far as the 2 mile where we found a horse, big fat horse. So we rode it back. But my father was very aware of the laws of sweating another man's horse. Oh, he was outraged, but we didn't care. And then, and there were the days of the rabbits, If you went down there beyond Den's house, the School of the Airs, but if you kept on going down to just before the corner, going to the 2 mile, there was a huge rabbit den there. And that rabbit den remained there until, about 1951, I think. That was about the time the myxomatosis turned up. And so there was that and so on. And the family used to organise community swimming. My father would get my grandfather's old T-model Ford or something, and we would let it be known in the street on a Sunday, usually Sunday afternoon. We would let it be known in the street that we were going to the 2 mile to swim this afternoon. And we'd probably go, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 o'clock when it got a little bit cooler, under 120 or something like that. But my father would slowly drive the car down the street, and such people who wished to go swimming would join in. Well, by the time we got down to Cunnamulla Road, that's down near the Pettiford's place, well, the car was filled. They were on the running boards on both sides. The dog was probably on the, what do you call that thing? The mudguard. Or sometimes the dog actually was right on top of the motor, I think. Then there was a great crowd on the back. But we'd have this huge crowd. And, like an Indian train. And anyway, we'd get the 2 mile, we'd have a damn good time. That reminds me, I mustn't forget this one. In about 1949, in 1949, a fellow called Jack Rowe or Jim Rowe, I can't remember. Rowe, anyway. Jill, his daughter, was in our class. He had a big black bus. And he had a bus service. Now, I'm not quite sure where he used the bus service, but I know that in the mid-50s, he ran a bus service around town. And you could use that bus. In fact, you could get on that bus at the light pole outside our place and Lahane's place in King Street. And for threepence, the bus would eventually take you to the school. Excuse me, but eventually it proved not to be a paying concern, and so that was the end of, I think it was Jimmy Rowe. But, every now and then I think of people that I knew in class, and I often wonder, because, I sort of lost track of all of these people, and they obviously lost track of me. What happened to Michael Gulshannon? I do not know. What happened to Errol Stein? I do not know. What happened to Margaret Roberts? I do not know. What happened to Kath Heron? Well, I know Kath married a doctor, but what happened beyond that, I really do not know. But then if you go down, there was Jill Rowe was in the class. I don't know whether Jeannie Wright and June McGaw and Joan McConnell were still in the class at that time. But what happened to them? I don't know. Robert Endine. Robert was down near the front of the class, of course, but Robert was a nice fellow. And what happened to him? I do not know. Speck Heinemann. Speck, I went to his birthday party once, and his mother made wonderful, what do they call those little things? Oh, those little cakes, individual cakes. They've got a bit of icing on top and then a cherry or something. And his mother used to make those. Oh, I wanted to make a guts of myself at that party. But my mother said, be careful. Don't make a pig of yourself. People will think you're greedy and got no manners. Well, I think I might have had 2, but I wanted to have 20. That reminds me, I was once in London and unaccustomed to the sophisticated English ways, and a very reverend gentleman, where was he? He was down at Brighton, near Arundel or something like that. Anyway, somehow or another, he heard I was in London and was going to prove hospitable. So he said, look, would you come down to Brighton, I think it was, and, I'll show you around Brighton and so on. So down I went. Well, he decided we would have morning tea or something. Well, we had tea, but they brought out this big plate of cakes. It had about 20 cakes on it. And I thought, all of my Christmases had come at once, and I thought that all these cakes were for us. The only thing that saved me from disgrace was the fact that he wasn't eating much. Because he wasn't eating much, I couldn't eat much either. But I wanted to, bog in. I would have eaten every single one of those cakes. But apparently the rule is when you go into those English morning tea shops, they bring a great big plate, tray. These, like platforms of cakes. And you choose 1 or 2 as may take your fancy, but not all 20. Oh, look, I narrowly escaped disgrace on that day, and so on. But anyway, Speck Heinemann's mother made things like that. But anyway, I don't know, I think Speck may no longer be with us. But I often wonder, And then I'm going to tell more about the Maris, that Johnny Maris. Calling everyone related to Johnny Maris. If anyone knows anything about that Maris family, they lived in Paris Street, I want to know about them. Or if anyone knows about the Lewises, Lenny Lewis, round there in Carter Street, Carter and May, let me know, because I really want to discover what the real story of those people were. Because certainly with the Marises, I dismissed them. But they had books. And I'd love to know how. That's why I want to find that out. But I'll tell you that story one of these days. So anyway, that's the other miscellaneous stuff that I can think of. And after this, I want to get on with the nuts and bolts of what went on in an ordinary... How you kept warm in winter. Because those houses were like refrigerators. And there was only one warm room in the house, and that was the kitchen. I did all my homework in the kitchen. Oh dear, it was not... And I could only begin my homework when people went to bed, because, they too sought refuge in the kitchen. And, oh dear, life was... I would have changed a few things if I could have. But, of course, I couldn't be a time traveller at that time. So, no, there we are. They're bits and pieces that I can think of. So, okay, then. Next time, I'm moving on to nuts and bolts. And one of these days, I'm going to come out to Charleville, although I tell you there's highway robbery going on. The other day, I was torn. I was thinking of going out to Charleville. But simultaneously in my mind, I realised that I had a great number of Singapore Airlines frequent flyer points that they threatened, the swine, to cancel if they weren't used within no time at all. Well, what was I to do? I was thinking of going to Charleville or going to Singapore. I checked on what the price would have been. Of course, it didn't cost me anything ultimately to go to Singapore, so that's what I decided to do. Later in the year, of course. But I thought, well, what would it cost me to go to Singapore? And I discovered that it would cost me almost as much to go to Charleville, return, as it would cost me to go to Singapore. Well, I practice buyer's resistance. There's no way in the world I'm paying that amount of money. Obviously, the airlines recognise that the only people who can afford to travel on their services are the government employees, and so the fares are pitched at what the government will pay, which is rather more than those of us from Lower King Street can pay. Oh, look, this is a wicked world.